The Book of Abraham.
There is simply an incredible wealth of ancient Egyptian and other Near Eastern historical documents that substantiate what Joseph Smith said. He simply could not have guessed correctly so many times. He was actually translating from an ancient text, and he was a prophet of God.
In places where I've had questions about whether Joseph Smith got something right, and I've done my homework, he's never been wrong.
There's enough evidence from Egyptology and from traditions about Abraham that tie into what Joseph Smith couldn't have possibly known, but he hit right on target.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called the Mormon Church, is unique among other Christian faiths in many respects. One way in which the LDS Church is unique is that it accepts additional books as scripture besides the Holy Bible. These include the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. Within the Pearl of Great Price is a most remarkable text called the Book of Abraham. It purports to be a translation of some ancient records that have fallen into our hands from the catacombs of Egypt. The Book of Abraham has a curious and complicated history. While Latter-day Saints may be generally aware of how the Book of Abraham was produced, there remains much to explore and understand. Where did the Book of Abraham come from? How did Joseph Smith get the Egyptian papyri that he translated? What is the relationship between the papyri and the text of the Book of Abraham? What happened to Joseph Smith's papyri after his death? Have Egyptologists translated the papyri? Do Joseph Smith's translations match the Egyptologists' translations? While accepted as scripture by Latter-day Saints, the Book of Abraham has withstood some vigorous criticism from skeptics since it was first published in 1842 in the LDS Church newspaper, The Times and Seasons. This DVD, produced by the Foundation for Apologetic Information and Research, is aimed to introduce Latter-day Saints and other eager investigators to the history surrounding the Book of Abraham and to answer the questions asked by both believers and critics alike.
In some ways, the story of the Joseph Smith papyri begins with Napoleon. When Napoleon invades Egypt, the Europeans have not been in Egypt really for a very long time, if ever. Not really ever in strong numbers. Napoleon invades Egypt. He brings with him a group of people who draw all sorts of things, both the inscriptions and pictures of the Egyptian monuments, and suddenly Europe is awash with excitement about Egypt. Every European country sends people into Egypt to try and get cool things to bring home. So this is when most of the great museum collections in Europe come out of Egypt, and they're just bringing out as much as they can. And it's during this time period that a man named Lebolo, who works for the French government, and he's finding mummies and papyri and all sorts of other things and exporting them. Part of what he finds are the mummies and the papyri that Joseph Smith will end up with.
These mummies and papyri made their way into the hands of Michael Chandler, who was a traveling showman and antiquities dealer. Chandler toured throughout the United States and exhibited his artifacts to the public for a fee. When Chandler heard that Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, claimed to have the ability to translate ancient records, he made his way to Kirtland, Ohio, then headquarters of the LDS Church and residence of Joseph Smith. Chandler came to Kirtland in July of 1835 and presented to Joseph Smith different papyrus scrolls that were accompanied by various mummies. Upon examining the scrolls, Joseph announced that one of them contained the writings of Abraham, the great biblical patriarch, and another the writings of Joseph of Egypt, who was sold into slavery by his brothers. Joseph Smith and other church members pooled together their money and purchased the scrolls and mummies for $2,400. It is estimated by historians that the church purchased at least 5 scrolls and 4 mummies. Joseph Smith kept the papyri and the mummies in his possession throughout his life, and besides working on the translation of the Book of Abraham, he often exhibited them to curious guests and visitors. After Joseph's death in 1844, his papyri passed through various hands until portions of the papyri were sold to Abel Combs, who in turn sold pieces of the papyri to the Wood Museum of St. Louis, Missouri. Eventually, this portion of the papyri was relocated to Chicago, Illinois, and was unfortunately destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Abel Combs also kept a part of the papyri for himself, and this collection eventually made its way to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The museum kept Joseph Smith's papyri in its archives until 1967, when these fragments were returned to the LDS Church. Among the papyri returned to the church in 1967 included the original source of Facsimile 1 of the Book of Abraham. Since 1967, the remaining Joseph Smith papyri have remained in the custody of the LDS Church.